are these people?
Over this last week, a lot of things been happening in Syria, as well as the last decades. And it's confusing and complicated, and I'm going to try to do my best with the information we have at hand. And we'll be keeping an eye on it for, just because we need to. But Damascus has fallen. Assad has left. I do believe is somewhere in Russia, so we do know that. Mm-hmm. But we'll start with Jason Ditz over at antiwar.com, friends of the show, who writes, Reuters says Syrian army command says Assad's rule has ended, right? I don't know about celebrations, but the Islamist offensive across western Syria has accelerated substantially in the past few days. And now Reuters is reporting that the Syrian army command is telling officers that the era of Assad's rule has ended. The apparent regime change is the culmination of just 2 weeks of offensive by the Islamist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, aka HTS and allies. HTS is run by Abu Muhammad al-Jalani and has had considerable ties to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They held only a portion of the Idlib province at the beginning, which they had for years, as the Syrian civil war has mostly stalemated. HTS took the major city of Aleppo in just a few days, and the Syrian army promised a counterattack that ultimately never came. The HTS offensive continued southward, seizing Hama, then 48 hours, taking both Homs and Damascus as well. So the current situation leaves the HTS in control of the 4 largest cities in Syria, along with much of the country's southern frontier with Israel and Jordan. Celebrations have been reported in Damascus, bullshit, but there is also substantial uncertainty over what is going to happen next. Other parts of Syria remain divided, with the Kurdish SDF, backed by the US, holding the northeast. The SDF has also seized other towns and villages in recent days, as the Syrian government was unable to defend them. Unable may not be the right word. Not sure about that yet. Further west along the Mediterranean coast, there's no word on who is in control of the cities like Tartus. The Russian Navy, however, has reportedly withdrawn from the Tartus point. The HTS hasn't addressed what will happen to the port, but with numerous reports of them receiving arms from the Ukrainian government, it seems likely they will look to expel Russia on a permanent basis. So it's not clear that the HTS offensive is actually over with the fall of Damascus either. Over the past several days, it's been reported that HTS leader Abu Muhammad al-Julani was keen to take over not only Syria, but Lebanon as well, and had offered to allow Israel to open embassies in both Damascus and Beirut after they take them. Turkey has been openly backing the HTS offensive, and Turkish allied rebel factions participating in the fighting. Israel and the US have been a little less outspoken in their support for the Al-Qaeda-linked HTS, but both expressed a preference for HTS over the Assad government. We'll get to that. They're definitely happy about it. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has said the U.S. won't cry about the ouster of Assad and favor the Al-Qaeda-aligned faction. Still, it's not clear a Sunni Islamist government with such strong historic ties to Al-Qaeda will end up being particularly friendly to Israel in the long run. The U.S. may also quickly find the HTS becoming an enemy once again when the faction decides to attack the SDF. Not so sure about that. HTS hostility to the Kurdish SDF is a long-standing issue and likely a big part of why the Turkish government has been supporting them. So, HTS formed in early 2017 as a merger of several Islamist militant groups, centering initially around fighting Jabhat al-Nusra, but ultimately merging with them. Jabhat al-Nusra was effectively the Syrian wing of Al-Qaeda, though it rebranded in 2016, claiming to cut ties with Al-Qaeda. Despite that, HTS maintains much of the underlying rhetoric. Exactly what the result of this offensive will be is still unclear. Even in the indications are that Assad is out, it seems unlikely that the HTS will be broadly embraced across Syria, and the Syrian civil war may not be complete after over a decade of territory trading hands back and forth. So, any questions so far?
Mm-mm.
Okay. again, I definitely go look at the reporting from Vanessa Beeley, Eva Bartlett, Kevork Almasian, any others I'm missing? Morandi, UK Column's been doing incredible work on this, so please go check them out to keep up to date on accurately what's happening there. But things like this, new regime forces in Syria carrying out summary executions, right? Classic back of the head, throw them in the pile of bodies sort of executions. So things are not going well there. I've been seeing quite a bit of horror stories, especially from Syrian Christians who, part of this is religious extremism to some degree. I don't know how much of that is involved, but, also there's a lot of factors that play involved in this entire thing. A lot of people are blaming the Assad government, and that's definitely not the problem. The government that may have been under him might be, but we'll get to some of that. But antiwar.com will tell you that Netanyahu takes credit for Assad's overthrow. Israel seizes the Golan Heights buffer zone. Yay!
Which, if that, people were saying what happened in Syria is a good thing. If Netanyahu is praising it, that should tell you everything right there.
So,
but then again, I don't. But to be fair to people, people don't know about.
Yeah, they got no idea what's going on over here.
They have no idea.
No.
So,
and I barely know what's happening, and it's a lot more than most. So,
right.
Anyway, Netanyahu on Sunday celebrated the overthrow of Assad by Al-Qaeda-linked militants and confirmed that Israel has seized a buffer zone inside Syria. Buffer zone. That separates the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights from the rest of Syria's territory. This is a historic day in the history of the Middle East, Netanyahu said during a visit.
For you.
Yes.
For you. Yeah. Just a minute. For you.
The Assad regime is a central link in Iran's axis of evil. Called it an axis of evil. Great. You got one to talk there, dog. The regime is fallen. Netanyahu credited Israel with setting off the processes that led to the downfall of Assad. In the months leading up to the offensive launched by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Israel was waging a war against Hezbollah and ramped up airstrikes in Syria. I do believe, I think it was Vanessa Beeley that said something like a lot of this started right after the supposed ceasefire in Lebanon. They essentially just switched targets, right? They also didn't stop bombing Lebanon, so hard to tell, but I've heard some of that going around. This is a direct result of the blows we have inflicted on Iran and Hezbollah, the main supporters of the Assad regime, Netanyahu said. This has created a chain reaction through the Middle East of all those who want to be free from this oppressive and tyrannical regime. So this is this alleged buffer zone over here into Syria. Right, this got bigger by the way, after this photo was made. But the Israel leader also said he directed the IDF to capture the buffer zone in Syria. Together with the defense minister and a full backing from the cabinet, I directed the IDF yesterday to take control of the buffer zone and the dominant positions near it. We will not allow any hostile force to establish itself on our border. The buffer zone Israel has seized has been patrolled by a UN peacekeeping force known as UNDOF since 1974. Netanyahu declared that the agreement established the buffer zone and UNDOF has now collapsed. So, the New York Times later reported that Israeli troops had entered Syrian territory beyond the buffer zone and took control of several locations. Israel also pounded Syria with airstrikes on Sunday, targeting dozens of military and government sites. Israeli officials said the purpose of the attacks was to prevent weapons from ending up in the hands of hostile forces. So, a lot of gaslighting happening over here. There are signs that Israel's been planning to make a move on the buffer zone before the Assad government collapse. The AP reported that Israel began construction along the buffer zone, citing satellite images. After the report, UNDOF warned that Israel was committing severe violations of the deal with Syria that established the buffer zone. So, yeah. Your friend Brett Wilkins over at Common Dreams, U.S. bombs over 75 targets in Syria after Assad falls. So, in case you were wondering what we were up to, U.S. military forces launched dozens of airstrikes on more than 75 Islamic State targets in Syria on Sunday after the fall of longtime Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and amid ongoing Israeli and Turkish attacks on the war-torn Middle Eastern nation. According to CENTCOM, more planes, including B-52 bombers, F-15 fighters, and A-10 ground attack aircraft, conducted dozens of precision airstrikes targeting known ISIS camps and operatives in central Syria. Yeah, okay. ISIS stands for what again, people? What does that stand for again? The Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. Oh, sorry, that's their old name. CENTCOM called the strikes part of the ongoing mission to disrupt, degrade, and defeat ISIS in order to prevent the terrorist group from. I doubt very fucking much that they were trying to fight any ISIS cells in this. That's some bullshit, I'm betting. I'm not going to listen to what CENTCOM is trying to say. The U.S., together with allies and partners in the region, will continue to carry out operations to degrade ISIS operational capabilities even during this dynamic period in Syria. U.S. and coalition forces have killed and maimed at least tens of thousands of Syrians and Iraqis during the Obama, Trump, and Biden admins as part of the anti-ISIS campaign and wider so-called war on terror when we ended up funding them. Funny how that works. But Sunday's U.S. strikes came as al-Assad and relatives fled to Russia. Again, fled may not be the right word here, where they have been granted asylum amid the fall of the capital, Damascus, to rebel forces. Also on Sunday, Israeli forces seized Mortaria in the Golan Heights and ordered residents of 5 villages to stay home and not go out until further notice, so we can kill you there, if they want to remain safe, says Israel. Conquered the western 2/3 of the Golan Heights in 1967 and has unlawfully occupied it ever since. In 1981, Israel illegally annexed the occupied lands, just in case you're wondering. So, this is what was happening on Twitter after this, right? The Syrian Hermon is in our hands. Anyone up for a ski trip? They say. So, fuck you, Zionist piece of shit. Anyway, again, Netanyahu, we won't allow hostile forces nonsense. Which doesn't apparently go for anyone on the other side to build defenses. That's then aggression from them. Numerous Israelis celebrated the seizure on social media, while others cautioned against boasting. Meanwhile, in northern Syria, Turkish airstrikes in support of Syrian National Army rebels were battling U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces fighters in and around the Kurdish-controlled city of Manbij, reportedly killed numerous civilians along with dozens of militants. In what is called a horrific massacre, the London-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said Monday that 11 civilians from the same family, including women and 6 children, were killed in a Turkish drone strike on the SDF-controlled village of Al-Mustahira in northern Raqqa government. So Dave DeCamp over at Anti-War, right? U.S. backs Israel's land grab, standard stuff, right? You know, again, several areas beyond the buffer zone. When asked, State Department Matt Miller said it was important to put the situation in context. God, if you put punchable faces in the dictionary, Matt Miller comes up as the first option, but, you know, first of all, the Syrian army abandons its positions. Again, we're going to get to this. Abandoned's not necessarily the right word. So, yeah, I mean, every country has the right to take action against terrorist organizations, Miller said. Does that include Israel? Seeing as how we've called their acts terrorism? No? Miller? Are you sure about that? Miller also insisted the Israeli occupation of the land was temporary. Oh, yeah, okay. The second thing that is important is that Israel has said that these actions are temporary to defend its borders. These are their permanent actions. Bullshit. Also on Monday, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu declared the Golan Heights would be Israel's forever. Huh, funny how that fucking works there, doesn't it? Talking out of both sides of your fucking mouth. Anyway, several Arab countries, including Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, strongly condemned the Israeli seizure of the Syrians' territory. The Qatari foreign minister said it considered the move a dangerous development and a blatant attack on Syria's sovereignty and unity, as well as a flagrant violation of international law. Qatari may be one of the factors here, from what I've heard, right? They have a vested interest in this land. Particularly gas pipeline into Europe is the goal for them, right? So they have tons of oil sitting under their sands, and they could theoretically make it a lot easier for Europe to then get gas for it, right? You know, they've been having trouble with Russian gas here recently, so that would put them in competition with Saudi Arabia as a major power. So
he who controls the spice controls the universe.
You know how it works. So but yeah, this might be just kind of gaslighting from them. And it might also be like, hey, Israel, that's our land, you know? So we'll see. Saudi Arabia, another factor in this, said the land grab confirmed Israel's continued violation of the rules of international law and its determination to sabotage Syria's chances of restoring its security, stability, and territorial integrity. So, yeah. Any questions so far?
Nope.
So, in other news, Caitlin says the U.S. is considering removing Halat Tahrir al-Sham from its list of designated terrorist organizations. Following the Al-Qaeda's affiliate victory in Syria, I have said it before, and I'll say it again, terrorist organization is a completely arbitrary designation which is used as a tool of Western narrative control to justify war and militarism. In effect, it just means disobedient population who needs bombs dropped on them. Any questions? So here's the proof, right? This is from the U.S. Embassy in Syria. HTS is a merger, and any group that mergers into it becomes part of Al-Qaeda's Syrian network. We remain committed to bring leading AQS figures in HTS to justice. So, again, they had reward for justice up to $10 million, Care Bear, they wanted for this guy. So you could have gotten a $10 million reward unless you worked at McDonald's. Then they don't give you those rewards. But anyway, the Spectator Index says, breaking. Syria's new government announces it will move away from state-controlled economy to a free market model to attract investment. What do you think that means, Collin?
Syria has a capitalism.
So, anyway, yeah, right. Ran by Al-Qaeda. General strike. Let me translate. Syria's national resources and politicians will be for sale to the highest bidder. So, yeah. Anyway, you remember this guy, right? Mr. Muammar Gaddafi had some very similar things he had to deal with, which he writes, Obama wants to kill me, to take away the freedom of our country, to take away our free housing, our free medicine, and our free education, our free food, and replace it with American-style thievery called
capitalism.
But all of us in the third world know what that means. It means corporations run the countries, run the world, and the people suffer. Any questions? No?
No.
Okay. I got it. So, Syrian girl on Twitter And this is why I was prefacing all those Syrian fled, abandoned, all that stuff, right? So she says the Syrian army didn't run. They were ordered to stand down. They claim that they didn't want to fight is a lie. They gave 170,000 men to this cause, not to mention the injured. Here, a soldier says, we were ordered to retreat from Hans. We were sold out. The Syrian army in Hama and Homs, he says, I come to assure we have everything under control against the armed groups. They controlled the area, but we were all ordered to give up the land up to HTS. Why? Right? So she continues, the Syrian army did not run. Syrian soldiers say that they were ordered to surrender after some type of agreement. They say they have gathered in the coastal mountains and will continue to fight with our souls and with our blood we give to Syria. So, yeah, there's some shenanigans going on. I don't know of what kind. I don't know what agreements were made within the government itself, but something's up. So, Fee replying, as some of us have said from the start, while some claim to be offered money, the majority were told to stand down and some got in trouble for not following, but many suddenly only want to blame Syria and Assad. Well, that's the new narrative you have to swallow. Deals were made. So, yeah, I don't know. And these are the things that we still aren't sure of yet. So we'll see in the coming days and weeks what things transpire, but you know, don't believe anything the mainstream media or our government is putting out about it. So, good rule of thumb. Anyway, speaking of Vanessa Beeley, who we've had on the show, please go check that out and what she said about Assad and Syria in general. But she gives a quick update. We know she was in Damascus at the time, so she writes more than 350 Israeli airstrikes targeting Syrian territory in the past hours, and an enemy Israeli occupation of Syrian territory equivalent to twice the size of the Gaza Strip, and their army is less than 40 kilometers away from the capital, Damascus. After a rather turbulent 48 hours, Vanessa is safe and will be writing and broadcasting as normal very shortly. She had 1 hour to pack one suitcase and take one dog, and get through a border swarming with armed thugs, looting and fighting amongst themselves over the spoils. The night before was sent besieged by armed groups firing in the air to celebrate their victory, while Israel started using bunker buster bombs on Syrian military sites and air defense close to the house. The house shook from top to bottom. At 10 a.m., truckloads of armed thieves arrived and battered at my front gate. I was on the phone to a friend who begged me to find a weapon. Clearly, I don't have any. I yelled at them from inside, and the dogs went crazy. After 3 batterings, they left. Much more to recount over the coming days. Social media is a mess of lies, misinformation, and downright hypocrisy. Thank you to everyone who emailed and messaged. It really lifted my spirits in an all-time low. I wrote this note this morning. I need a long time to process the loss for the whole world and for me as a human being who saw my future living in my beloved Syria. Anyone who can explain why Assad's pre-recorded farewell speech and possible explanation of the catastrophic events was not aired as planned after they left the country, please get in touch. I know her and Kevork differed on this. He had not heard this. She says she got it from reliable sources. So, not sure how that worked out. I think she said she'd wait till the dust had settled, which is a good idea in these situations. Right. But all the backstabbers who are now turning against Assad, protecting their interests, you were in a position to say something for 14 years. Why didn't you? I don't blame any of the ordinary people for adopting the new era. People in Syria are isolated and afraid. Some are terrified. The mainstream media vultures are flooding in to clot the corpse of one of the oldest civilizations in the world. History will be revised, as it always is, by the victor. If only the victor were genuinely Syrian and grassroots, not a terrorist force incubated in CIA black sites and empowered by Israel and the collective Western alliance of callous hegemony. Also, Ukraine is involved in this, if I'm not mistaken, in training some of these people. So, and I think there's some other groups that are doing that. So, Syria will become a toothless melting pot of foreign interests, resource looting, and expanding Zionist land grabs. A nation without any army, without any military infrastructure, is not a nation. It's a playing field for the predators. This is a record of Israeli strikes so far against Syrian military and defense infrastructure. A squadron of 30 Israeli aircraft over Syria strikes military installations and air defense. Israeli Air Force targeted the headquarters of the Electronic Warfare Administration near al-Badalia, adjacent to the city of Sayyida Zainab in Damascus countryside. Israel bombed scientific researchers in Barza in Damascus, the 47th Brigade in Hama, and the helicopter airport in Akraba. Israeli airstrikes on Yafor area in the countryside of Damascus. Israeli warplanes bombed the ship port in Latkia, according to reports. The attacks targeted military ships anchored in the port. Israel is exploiting the collapse of the state in Syria and destroying all the strategic capabilities of the Syrian army to prevent anyone from benefiting from them in the future to rebuild a strong army. Israeli warplanes have become capable of entering Syrian airspace and using bunker-busting bombs. Israel has destroyed all Syrian air defense bases and military airports and is now intensively targeting ballistic missile warehouses and weapon factories. Collin, when we talked about American war games not too long ago, what was one of the rules they changed for the supposed Middle Eastern side? Do you remember? So it was air defenses mainly, right? Okay. So, you know, you're not allowed to have air defenses and you're not allowed to communicate encryptedly. That's pretty much one of those things. So that's clearly a big factor for them, right? Air superiority is a big part of our tactics. Houses in Damascus are shaking due to the intensity of successive Israeli airstrikes. Dozens of Israeli airstrikes are now being carried out in various parts of Syria. Israeli raids on Hamishi, I forget how Q's are done here, but airport in northeastern Syria. Israeli airstrikes on Jabla on the Syrian coast. Israel renewed its airstrikes on Akraba military airport in Damascus countryside in the Shinsar area south of Homs. Israeli airstrikes on Basel al-Assad's military airport in Jabla. So, yeah. I also wanted to let people know, as does Vanessa, that you can consider subscribing to her Substack, which I leave this QR code for you to scan and go find her Substack. Her article's in the description below. Go click it. Go give her a you know, it's like $50 for a year, you know? So send her some love. She's going to send money back to people who are struggling in Syria. So please go help out. You know, I'm sure the people there need it. And, you know, Vanessa also, I probably doesn't know her future. So go help her out in general too. So, any questions, closing thoughts? I
mean, I remember talking with when we interviewed Vanessa, when we were talking about Syria, and we actually have a clip of that specific conversation. Please go watch it. You know, she just mentioned overall her love for Syria and a love for the people there, and me being able to acknowledge that, like in terms of being in that world. I spent time in Morocco and Jordan.
Yeah.
And I think that's the issue. I think that's at the root cause, the issue that people have. They're fearful of Arabs. You know, they kind of think of them as backwards. They kind of think of them as, you know, like second-class citizens, and like they're like somewhat conservative and very, you know, all the things. I went there, and as I told her, which I was able to, you know, confirm, they were probably the most hospitable people that I've ever met, you know. And that's not to say they always agreed, like the people that I met, that they always agreed with my views, but they were willing to talk to me about it. They were willing to gain understanding about my viewpoint of the world. And I think, and they were able to, and I was able to do the same with them. Like, they're extremely open to hear, and like here it's kind of like decorum, and like you don't talk about politics because you don't want to piss people off. They don't believe that. It's the idea of like, we can talk about it, and not necessarily to disagree, but we want to build understanding amongst each other. So they're willing to talk to you, and they're willing to talk to you for hours about it. But the thing that I kind of realized from that is like, that's how they build relationship with you. Like, I remember a specific time that we went to a cafe. I forgot what the discussion was, but we were talking for hours. It was around politics. This was back in 2006. Yeah, I think 2006, 2007, when I was in Morocco and Jordan. When I left Jordan, like before I left Jordan, basically they were like, if you need anything, give us a call. Let us know. We will help you out. Like, that's the kind of hospitality that I experienced when I was in Jordan. And I know Richie Medhurst is also, being that he is Syrian, has also kind of said similar things.
Yep.
You know, so I think at the core of this, it's a matter of not knowing the culture, not knowing the people, and I think a lot of the stigma that Arabs have, in particular in the media, is just so misconstrued to make them seem like less than, and backwards in terms of they need to progress in a more civilized way, like the Israeli/white.
Yes.
In terms of progressism, and I think a lot of that has to do with religion, partially. But
even though their religion is equally as fucking
right,
violent and fanatical.
That's the irony of it. It's like, you're calling out Arabs for being violent, but you're justified in the violence that you're doing. And no country,
any of the violence that they've done,
no country is perfect. And again, I don't look to a country in terms of their leaders. I look to a country in terms of the people who are there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's ultimately the problem. Like, people look at their leaders and kind of paint a broad brush pertaining to the people that live in those countries. Like, you wouldn't do that. Like, I know people do it, but you would feel a way if people, now with Trump being in office, you would feel a way if people associated you as an American due to like what Trump is going to do or has done. You wouldn't appreciate that. So I don't think we deserve to give people that license to think that way of people who live in other countries, especially in the Arab world either. Yes, they may have issues that, especially regarding religion, that they disagree with. But again, I will argue that's more within the elite circles within those countries, and not necessarily with the people who are necessarily living there. But you can make that argument in any country. There's that issue. So, but yeah, just reminded me of when we spoke to her, and just saying how lovely. She invited us to go.
Right.
Pretty sure now that's not going to be a thing now for people who want to go now. But I remember she offered an invite to anyone who wants to go and experience. And I think people should do, well, that's going to remain to be seen now. But, but Arabs are not backward people. That's, I think, ultimately what I want to say. And it's depressing that we treat them that way. And I think that's just due to a lot of the misconstructions that they have, mostly in media, which I think is very upsetting.
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, it's just, and to all the Zionists out there,
your continued existence is a mockery of morality.
Pretty much. Well, talking about these things is why we're demonetized. You can go to ko-fi.com/indienewsnetwork. Scan that QR code on your screen. Or if you're in the live chat, put !donate and send us a little dollary deuce. We appreciate it, but we get it. It's tough. Just like and subscribe, hit the share button, leave a comment, let us know what you think. What do you think the next steps here are? But, otherwise, thanks for watching.